Hello and welcome to another episode of Punk Rock Politics with John Smith. I'm John Smith. We're going to go over an amazing article that I stumbled onto looking up Bernie's response to hashtag DemExit. Like Bernie Sanders or just Bernie responds to hashtag DemExit. Just saying this because it's important so, when you're doing research, you understand how people find, you know, important information, and especially how they find information that's not just put out by the corporate mainstream media, which is mostly propaganda. So, okay. Naked Capitalism. Fearless commentary on finance, economics, politics, and power. All right. Hashtag DemExit now. I was just, I figured you might want to look at them too, but I was just looking at some of the other links and articles that they had. Hashtag DemExit now. How the Democratic Party cheated Bernie Sanders out of the nomination. Posted on April 18th, 2020 by Yves Smith. Shout out to Yves Smith, or I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Yves Smith or Ives Smith. Fellow Smith. By Anis Shavani, whose recent political books include Why Did Trump Win?, Confronting American Fascism, and A Radical Human Rights Solution to the Immigration Problem. He is the author of many critically acclaimed books. Oh no. Sorry. He is the author of many critically acclaimed books of fiction, poetry, and criticism, including most recently, A History of the Cat in 9 chapters or less. Okay. Well, no, I made it worse. I was trying to make the screen better, and I made it worse somehow. Here we go. That's pretty good. All right. Forcing the March 17th primaries in Florida, Arizona, and Illinois to go forward, despite reports of exceedingly low turnout throughout the day, which miraculously and quite expectedly turned into higher turnouts than 2016 in both Florida and Arizona by the time the final reporting came in, was the last straw. This farce occurred despite the Ohio governor postponing their primary on the same day. This slap in the face of voters was then compounded by the even worse parody of the April 7 Wisconsin primary being allowed to go ahead at the peak of the pandemic, with polling stations vastly reduced from 180 to just 5 in Milwaukee alone, and absentee ballots often not received or recorded, while maintaining the pretense that somehow all of this constituted a legitimate election. In the middle of the pandemic, with the entire nation considering a de facto lockdown and many communities already there, the DNC was hell-bent on driving the final nail in the coffin of the youth movement, even though the Sanders campaign had suspended GOTV efforts for obvious reasons, and even if Biden never really had a presence in any of the latest round of states. GOTV is Get Out the Vote if you don't know. In Maricopa County, Arizona, where many polling stations were shut down, in-person turnout was reportedly higher by 10,000 people than in 2016. And that's just one representative example from the March 17th primary states. Furthermore, the DNC threatened the remaining primary states against postponing their elections for health reasons, preempting moves similar to those made by Louisiana, Georgia, and others. The stage is being set for a virtual convention, followed by the possible resurgence of the illness in the fall to orchestrate a virtual general election. Social distancing has come in handily as the most convenient antidote to political solidarity. Biden has already made it clear that he's not the least bit interested in making any real overtures toward bereft progressives, just as Hillary wasn't after her forceful seizure of the nomination in 2016. Okay. When they stopped counting the vote in Iowa, depriving the leading candidate of essential momentum, it was a clear indication that once again the party establishment would do everything to manipulate results in favor of yet another neoliberal avatar bound to lose to Trump in an ignominious ignominious landslide. Let me read that again just because, when you stop like that, it messes it up. When they stopped counting the vote in Iowa, depriving the leading candidate of essential momentum, it was a clear indication that once again the party establishment would do everything to manipulate results in favor of yet another neoliberal avatar bound to lose to Trump in an ignominious landslide, which is actually what the Democratic Party establishment wants. 4 more years of their demonized opponent rather than the tiniest return toward social decency. Nothing about the coronavirus changes this essential dynamic. That's how bad the Democratic Party has become, blatantly tipping the scales toward their favored outcome in order to maintain oligarchic control. And they expect us to vote blue no matter who. Now I'm going to try and go through all the articles. I'm going to make a bunch of shorter videos after this, but this is really important, so I hope you read at least that far, and I hope you continue to watch it because it's very important to understand where this data comes from and to actually show that there's evidence to back this up. So let's start with the first link. Forcing the March 17th primaries in Florida, Arizona, and Illinois to go forward despite reports of exceedingly low turnout throughout the day, which miraculously and quite expectedly turned into higher turnouts in 2016 in both Florida and Arizona by the time the final reporting came in. So let's see what this link takes us. This is from the New York Times, and it's pretty obvious. This needs to go away. I'm good. Okay. It's pretty obvious. I don't know why this thing... Oh, there's the X. It seems pretty obvious that vote by mail is a real issue. I'm going to do a whole separate video on that pretty soon, because even for years and years, going back many years in the United States, there's been issues with absentee and mail-in ballots in general, and that they're not counted at the same level or more, in some cases, than the horrible digital voting booths that could be manipulated and changed, and were in 2000 and 2004. And, we need paper ballots, and if we're going to do mail-in to be safe for coronavirus, there needs to be a way to make sure that every single vote is counted. You need to be able to scan it on your phone or something like that. They need to give you a special, the government should provide a special voting sticker for the envelope, and we need to make sure that they're all accounted for. So you scan it at home, or take a picture of it if you don't have the technology, and find a way to upload it to a site to prove that it was put in the mail, and, stuff like that. Okay, maybe even a picture of you dropping that letter into the mail as well for extra evidence. Always make sure your vote counts, and fight if it didn't count or doesn't count. Illinois stumbles, as that's the only way we're going to get better policies. So we need to fight for this. Illinois stumbles as states see lighter voter turnout with many ballots in the mail. I keep messing things up. Illinois stumbles as states see lighter voter turnout with many ballots in the mail. Florida, Illinois, and Arizona pressed ahead with their presidential primary elections on Tuesday, but chaos and confusion in Illinois sent a in-person turnout diving amid coronavirus fears. In-person voting in Chicago was far below normal levels on Tuesday. Here's a picture. It's just that one lady. This article is by Nick Corasaniti, Stephanie Saul, Matt Stevens, and Reed J. Epstein. What an unfortunate name, Epstein. March 17th, 2020. Voting in major cities in Illinois was rife with confusion on Tuesday, and early turnout in many areas was significantly lower than expected, leading to complaints from poll workers and clashes between Chicago officials and the State House. Illinois is one of the 3 states that went ahead with their Democratic presidential primaries on Tuesday amid fears about people gathering in groups and risking exposure to the coronavirus. In Florida, relocated polling sites led to disruption, and low turnout was reported in some counties, while voting in others was running smoothly. Arizona, where a vast majority of voters had cast their ballots early, was reporting no major issues. Elections officials in all 3 states hoped that any drop-off in turnout would be partially offset by early voting and the vote-by-mail ballots that many Democrats filed in the weeks leading up to Tuesday. Let's read that again. Elections officials in all 3 states hoped that any drop-off in turnout would be partially offset by early voting and the vote-by-mail ballots that many Democrats filed in the weeks leading up to Tuesday. Ohio also had a presidential primary scheduled, but Governor Mike DeWine postponed it through a flurry of legal actions and declarations on Monday night, recommending that it be pushed to June 2nd. Voters who weren't aware of the late-night decision by the governor and the state's top health official were greeted Tuesday morning with closed doors and statements taped to windows saying the primary had been postponed. This is a gathering of people, and what we've tried to do is explain to Ohioans we cannot have large gatherings, Mr. DeWine said in an interview on ABC's The View on Tuesday, and so that is a problem. Tuesday's remaining elections, which will now award a total of 441 delegates, come as the Democratic field has winnowed to just two major candidates, former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr. and Senator Bernie Sanders. With polls showing Mr. Biden ahead in all three states, the results in Arizona, Florida, and Illinois could give Mr. Biden a sizable delegate lead and put more pressure on Mr. Sanders to step aside. It's funny because the polls were actually not all saying that. In fact, Bernie should have easily won Arizona, so I don't know what kind of crappy polls they're referencing, but, hey, it's corporate media. On Tuesday morning, that's why you need punk rock politics. On Tuesday morning, a spokesman for Mr. Sanders emphasized safety above all else and said the campaign was not doing traditional get-out-the-vote outreach in Florida, Illinois, and Arizona. We are making clear to voters that we believe going to the polls amid the coronavirus outbreak is a personal decision and we respect whichever choice they make, said Mike Kaska, the communications director for Mr. Sanders. We are also passing along guidance from the CDC on staying safe during the crisis. If you know what the CDC is, it's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The Biden campaign released a memo on Tuesday afternoon affirming its commitment to Tuesday's elections. We held elections during the Civil War, the 1918 flu pandemic, and World War II. The memo from Kate Bedingfield, the deputy campaign manager, said, "We are confident that we can meet that same challenge today and continue to uphold the core functions and values of our democracy." Well, Kate Bedingfield, you know what you did, and what you did was wrong, and we should definitely make sure we talk to her on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all those other apps, Instagram, any of those things. Kate Bedingfield, the deputy campaign manager for Joe Biden's campaign. Now, in-person elections are highly favorable to mail-in elections, but either way, we are not having the serious conversation about how we're going to secure our elections, and we haven't been. Bernie Sanders was talking about it in 2014, 15, 16, so are a lot of progressives and other people and activists and people concerned about privacy. And the biggest vote theft in America is not Russia, it's us. It's our own politicians. Voter suppression, stealing votes, wiping people that are supposed to be eligible from the polls. There's actually 17 million that the Republicans wiped off the polls from 2014 to 16. And I already covered a video on that. But we're going to do a short little video about that to make sure everybody knows about it. And there's a reason the Democratic Party is not telling people about it. And the MSNBC, CNN, CBS, ABC, Disney, NBC, and others are not talking about it. There's a very important reason. Anyway, we continue. Early Tuesday morning, officials in Florida and Illinois indicated that they were seeing signs of light turnout in polling places, which were to be stocked with hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, and protective masks for poll workers. In Chicago, multiple poll workers complained on social media that they did not have the proper cleaning supplies or hand sanitizer. In a teleconference Tuesday afternoon, Jim Allen, a spokesman for the Chicago Board of Elections Commissioner, said that as of 1 p.m., about 126,500 people had voted on Election Day. By comparison, he estimated that about 300,000 people had voted by the same time during the 2016 presidential primary. We certainly weren't anticipating this crisis, he said in the call. This has been a very challenging time. He added that about 200 polling places had been moved and shifted in recent days, noting that some precincts had not opened on time on Tuesday because personnel had not shown up. Illinois state officials also acknowledged that the turnout was exceedingly low. Even in an extremely low voter turnout primary, you would expect to see triple that, said Matt Dietrich, a spokesman for the State Board of Elections, referencing turnout in the Chicago area. These are illegitimate elections. This is just telling you more and more that people didn't get to vote and they were scared to vote during the pandemic, and the people didn't have the proper protective gear, both the people that were supposed to vote and the people that were running the elections. They were not being taken care of. Often they're volunteers, mostly volunteers, and this is absurd. They get paid very little amounts of money. Poll workers took precautions in Miami Beach. You see the protective gear there. All right. But these elections are still illegitimate, and we should call for new primaries in Florida, Illinois, and Arizona. Ami Gandhi, general counsel for the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, said her organization's hotline had received an unprecedented number of phone calls from voters. Our phones have been ringing off the hook in terms of voters having issues and problems and confusion in accessing the polls, Ms. Gandhi said. At Broadway United Methodist Church in Chicago, 25 people were turned away when they arrived and found the polling location closed. They didn't know where to go, Ms. Gandhi said, adding that a number of polling locations had been closed at the last minute as election officials sought to find safer alternatives. Is that what they were doing? Because it wasn't safe to have this primary without proper everybody having proper protective gear, masks, or even better than masks. We should have better than masks, like hazmat suits for Christ's sake. Like every single citizen that wants to vote, and every poll worker and everything else. Maybe they just didn't want you to vote. Maybe the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, the Democratic Party didn't want you to vote. And who shows up religiously in elections? Older voters. Who do they vote for? Not Bernie Sanders. But although that number greatly increased, and even in Nevada, he had like 42% of people 65 and older, and won every single other metric besides that. Literally beat everybody. And got 54%, I believe, or 56% of the vote, one of the two, which he beat all the other candidates running at the time. And supposedly Joe Biden won this election. Okay. Outside Chicago, turnout in Illinois was far lower than had been anticipated just days earlier. In Peoria, early voting numbers were up about 40% compared to 2016 figures, according to Tom Bride, the executive director of the Peoria County Election Commission. But primary day turnout has not kept up the pace. It's off-year election kind of slow, Mr. Bride said. He projected about 17% of the county's registered voters would turn out, down from 43% in 2016, when both parties had competitive presidential contests. This was the 2020 was a very competitive presidential contest. For a lot of people. Bernie Sanders definitely should have, and still should, and should not endorse Joe Biden and should attack him way more on the awful things he's done throughout his life and recently. DuPage County, a Chicago suburb that has had to relocate more than a dozen polling places, said that as of noon local time, about 49,000 votes had been cast, bringing the overall turnout to around 91,000, about 14% of the county's 614,000 registered voters. In Florida's Palm Beach County, that's a terrible number. In Florida's Palm Beach County, hundreds of volunteer poll workers told officials they could not show up on Tuesday, forcing the county to open some locations late and move other ones. Wow, I wonder what that did. Did that help Joe Biden? We have experienced poll worker no-shows causing some of our polling locations to open late. Wendy Sartori Link, the county supervisor of elections, wrote on Facebook. She added that several polling locations would have to be moved and encouraged voters to pick up a ballot from any of the county's 4 election offices. In Miami-Dade County, about 8% of the expected 4,800 poll workers did not show up on Tuesday morning, according to Susie Trudy, spokeswoman for the county election supervisor. Given the light election turnout, she said, "We are confident we are properly staffed to receive voters." Yeah, with 4,800 less poll workers? You're confident, Susie Trudy? You're confident, Susie Trudy, right there? SUZYTRUTIE. I wonder if she's on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. Let's tell her how we think, what we think about what she said, and how we feel. It's a blatant lie. At a Miami fire station early on Tuesday, Leah Weston, 34, said she wanted to maintain the habit of casting a ballot on Election Day. "I just enjoy the ritual of it, of going to my polling place," she said. She would have voted early over the weekend, but she chose to anxiety clean her home instead. She also figured correctly that the fire station would be less of a confined space than the indoor early voting sites. "Maybe 2 other voters were present," she said. "Cynically, I think turnout is going to be pretty low today," she said. "It's going to be easy to practice social distancing today." Even as officials in all 3 states conceded that turnout at physical polling places was likely to be lower on Tuesday, each state pointed to higher than normal early voting and voting by mail as indications that overall turnout could surpass 2016 levels. Of course they said that. In Arizona, more than 380,000 Democrats voted early. In 2016, the total turnout for the Democratic Party there was just under 410,000. Interesting. Those are very close numbers. So in Arizona, 380,000 Democrats voted early. In 2016, primary, the Democratic primary, there was only 410,000 total voters. Seem like interesting numbers. Maybe they're a little too close. Mail-in ballots were counted in Phoenix on Monday. This is, poll worker counting. Maricopa County, which includes Phoenix and its sprawling suburbs, exceeded its turnout from the 2016 Democratic presidential primary on early and mail-in voting alone before officials counted any ballots dropped off or cast on Tuesday, said Adrian Fontes, the Maricopa County recorder. About 3,500 ballots were cast in the county during the first hour voting was open, a pace that continued throughout the morning, Mr. Fontes said. Sophia Salas, a spokeswoman for the Arizona Secretary of State, said there was a steady stream of voters at polling places throughout the state Tuesday, though she could not elaborate or give specific numbers. Well, isn't that interesting? Well, maybe we should make Sophia Salas right there. Sophia space Solis. Maybe Sophia Salas. Maybe we should see where she is on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. And say, what are the numbers? Do you have the numbers yet? Why didn't you have the numbers then? A large number of Floridians have also voted early or cast ballots by mail, according to state data. The Florida Department of State reported Monday evening that more than 630,000 Democrats had voted by mail and more than 430,000 Democrats had taken advantage of early voting. Both the early vote by mail and early voting tallies were up significantly from the 2016 Democratic primary, when total turnout was around 1.7 million. In Pinellas County in Florida, more than 104,000 registered Democrats had already cast ballots, including 16,000 who voted on Tuesday morning, putting the county within striking distance of the nearly 106,000, I said that right, votes cast in the 2016 Democratic primary, with hours of voting still to come. Let's see that. That's a long sentence. So in Pinellas County in Florida, more than 104,000 registered Democrats had already cast ballots, including 16,000 who had voted on Tuesday morning, putting the county within striking distance of the nearly 106,000 votes cast in the 2016 Democratic primary, with hours of voting still to come. Wow, man, we had a lot of big turnout, and it just did so well for Joe Biden. The Illinois Democratic Party, a lot of people couldn't vote, though. You already discussed that, right? A lot of polls were closed. 4,800 workers couldn't show up here. 4,800 people didn't show up because of the coronavirus outbreak. And a lot of people reported that they tried to show up and vote, and they couldn't vote. The Illinois Democratic Party, so why are they having better numbers in 2016 if mad people face voter suppression or changing poll stations or whatever you want to call it? How are they getting these huge numbers? The Illinois Democratic Party said also, how are they doing it when it's historically proven that in the United States, absentee and mail-in voting, the huge numbers aren't counted. Huge numbers of those votes aren't counted. The Illinois Democratic Party said that as of Sunday, nearly 300,000 Illinoisans... Yeah, I said that right. It's just weird. The Illinois Democratic Party said that as of Sunday, nearly 300,000 Illinoisans had voted earlier by mail. Mary Morrissey, the party's executive director, said she expected the final number to exceed the 350,000 such votes cast in 2016. Well, maybe you should have some things to say to Mary Morrissey, huh? On all those social media sites, especially Twitter. It's great where you can find them, research what their Twitter handle is and their real name, and like the fact that she's in this case she is the executive director of the Illinois Democratic Party. As Ohio shuttered its polls on Tuesday, other states began to follow suit. Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland said Tuesday that he was postponing his state's presidential primary to June 2nd from April 28th. Like other states have done, all the primary elections will be postponed until June, which gives everyone time to prepare, Mr. Hogan said. And just Maggie Astor, Nate Cohn, Jennifer Medina, and Patricia Mazzei contributed reporting. And it gives you a nice little breakdown of all the people. Sorry, I don't have time. I have to get to more important news. Let's read this little nice sentence and then read the link they provided. This is a great article, a little piece here, this naked capitalism piece. Furthermore, the DNC threatened the remaining primary states against postponing their elections for health reasons, preempting moves similar to those made by Louisiana, Georgia, and others. Okay, so let's see what this link has to offer us. All right, here we go. So this is from The Guardian, obviously. And if you're just listening, you don't know that. U.S. elections 2020, world environment, soccer, U.S. politics. Look at that. In-person voting for March 17th, 2020, presidential primary election is suspended. Got all those notes. Montgomery County, Board of Elections. States delaying primaries past 9 June may face delegate penalty, warns DNC memo. Democratic National Committee reacts to Ohio postponement with memo that says party working with states on coronavirus measures. This is from Daniel Strauss in Washington. You got Daniel Strauss's little Twitter handle there. And this was done on March 17th, 2020. And that's, if you don't know, it's St. Patrick's Day as well. A new memo from the Democratic National Committee panel that handles delegate selection for the presidential nomination warns that states that hastily change the first determining step of their own process could be subject to penalties, including a 50% reduction in delegates if they hold primaries after a June cutoff date. The memo also says the panel is looking at ways to adjust how delegates are selected in response to the coronavirus pandemic. 3 states will hold primaries on Tuesday. A 4th, Ohio, postponed its vote on Monday due to COVID-19 and its drastic effect on public life. Louisiana, Kentucky, Georgia, and Maryland have also postponed their votes. As in virtually every part of U.S. society, election officials at every level have been discussing ways to safely administer elections without spreading the coronavirus. The new DNC memo, obtained by The Guardian, was sent to members of the Rules and Bylaws Committee on Wednesday night. We are working with state parties that need to make adjustments as needed to their delegate selection process so they can continue without major interruptions, wrote James Roosevelt and Lorraine Miller, the co-chairs of the Rules and Bylaws Committee, in the memo. So look, James Roosevelt and Lorraine Miller are the co-chairs of the Rules and Bylaws Committee for the Democratic National Committee, or the DNC, or the Democratic Party. Maybe we should ask them why they decided to have these elections when people weren't safe, didn't have the proper protective gear, when this was just breaking in the United States, and when poll workers didn't show up and they had to close polling areas and a lot of people did not get to voice their vote. Let's see if they're on social media. The regulations allow technical changes to be approved by the co-chairs. A number of states have taken dramatic steps to prevent spreading the coronavirus. Late on Monday night, Ohio's Governor Mark DeWine announced that his administration would order polling stations closed because of the health emergency. Several states have taken steps to change the date of their first determining step, the DNC memo said. It continued, the delegate selection rules provided that each state's first determining step must take place by June 9th, or 9th of June. If a state violates the rule on timing or any other rule, they can be subject to penalties as prescribed in Rule 21, including at least a 50% reduction in delegates, which will need to be reviewed by the RBC. I don't even know what the RBC is, but that's important. Just check it out. Rule 21, so you know what we're talking about, is saying that if you changed your primaries and didn't have them by June 9th, that you could lose 50% of your delegates. The convention essentially saying people's votes didn't count. The deadline to elect convention participants is the 20th of June, so state parties should have plenty of time to elect their delegates, alternates, and standing committee members. The committee also advised state parties to follow the recommendations of local health officials and prioritize health and safety of all individuals. We acknowledge the situation is very different in every state and want to give state parties flexibility to adjust their plans to address their own situations and local guidance. When Louisiana moved its primary, the DNC issued a similar warning. We will continue to work with every state party as they adjust their delegate selection plans around coronavirus, the DNC said then, adding a similar warning about the 9th of June deadline. This article was corrected on 17th of March 2020 to show that states not parties may be subject to penalties, and that such penalties would only be applied if primaries are held after the 9th of June. They already changed the primary date, but anyway. I shouldn't say that. The point is that they did this to scare states from doing this, because then people could, it's like a game. Like, you decided not to have it. Well, we should have in-person elections, and that's very important, and we should do it in a very extremely safe, well-funded way. I mean, like, where nobody can get the disease, like, literally, and spend the money on it, because democracy matters, and we can't just let somebody, like, stay longer in office, especially Donald Trump, for not having legitimate elections. But you can't, if we don't have a way to account for the mail-in voting, then that's not sufficient, that's not good enough, so we would have to postpone elections. For the first time in U.S. history that I'm aware of. But that's because we have a pandemic spreading around. Yeah, it's just to threaten states that they will lose half of their delegates at a state convention, meaning that people's votes and that they represent will not be counted, is just an absurdly authoritarian move by the Democratic National Committee. And the Democratic Party and the leaders who decided this should be ashamed of themselves, and they should even be prosecuted for crimes. Because people got sick and died because of this, including poll workers and other people. And people who were just trying to express their right to vote died doing so, and a ton of votes weren't counted. So some people died and risked their lives and suffered, or their family or their friends did, or their community did, and they weren't even able to vote. Absurd. And you should call it out and demand that people understand that this election was stolen, and all the illegitimate primaries need to be redone. They can do it fast, and they can do it safe. Don't let them tell you they can't. And the federal government should have to provide the proper protective gear for us to do this. There's a link for the stages being set for a virtual convention, but we're not going to do that right now because it's not as important to the story. The state, it is important, but and things could change. And we should demand we find a way to not have a virtual convention because that would stop protests and people from calling out the fact that this is rigged, like they did in 2016, but there will be way more people there this time. You can guarantee that. The stage is being set for a virtual convention regardless. The stage is being set for a virtual convention, followed by the possible resurgence of the illness in the fall to orchestrate a virtual general election. So all through the internet, not in person. There's ways to completely secure and make sure every vote is counted that way, but they're not going to do it. So we need to demand that if they think they're going to do that, then they better make sure all these votes count. Social distancing has come in handily as the most convenient antidote to political solidarity. Biden has already made it clear that he's not the least bit interested in making any real overtures toward bereft progressives, just as Hillary wasn't after her forceful seizure of the nomination in 2016. And forceful seizure of the nomination in 2016 is a polite way of saying she stole that shit. But they didn't want to say those actual words and turn some people off from reading it. But they stole it. She stole it. Hillary Clinton stole it. HRC, Hillary Rodham Clinton, stole the election. And she ran the DNC and funded it with her own money. Look it up. It's factual. Obama intentionally, just didn't put any money into the DNC. They set it up so that she'd be able to take over, use her own money, and control the entire party throughout the nation. Think about that for a minute. And make sure if anybody didn't like what she was doing, well, then they would have some problems. Now let's check this out. So let's check this link out and hope it lines up, or I'm going to have to pause it and fix the glitch. So I believe this video is from Christopher Valius.
Let's assume, and I've asked other candidates this kind of question, veto question. Let's flash forward. Your president, Bernie Sanders, is still active in the Senate. He manages to get Medicare for All through the Senate in some compromised version, the Elizabeth Warren version or other version. Nancy Pelosi gets a version of it through the House of Representatives. It comes to your desk. Do you veto it?
I would veto anything that delays providing the security and the certainty of healthcare being available now.
So what you just heard there was Joe Biden yesterday on MSNBC. He actually went on the media, guys, talking to Lawrence O'Donnell about how he would veto Medicare for All. Under a hypothetical scenario where he's president and Bernie and the rest of the Democrats have the ability to pass some sort of Medicare for All legislation, whether under the Warren mandate or the Bernie mandate or some combination, and it lands on his desk as president, he would veto it. Now, Biden tries to weasel word around the question, but what he says, guys, is very clear. He would veto Medicare for All. And this is such a telling quote, because what it shows is that Biden is even more conservative than we've been led to believe. Because many of the neoliberal Democrats, when they've opposed Medicare for All, sure, they've talked about the cost at times, but one of the key narratives is that it won't pass. That we can't have Medicare for All because it won't pass in the Senate in the House of Representatives. That's what Klobuchar has said often, that at the end of the day, you need to get enough senators on board to pass this legislation, and that there's not enough senators backing it now. You won't get to the 50 or 60 senators you need to pass Medicare for all. Let's look at a compromise position, because that's what will pass in both houses. That's what's palatable to middle America, to the non-liberal states. But here, even in a hypothetical, Biden is saying, look, we amass the votes. We get the broad public consensus. We get senators in purple states and maybe even a few red states to support Medicare for all. We have a big House majority that backs the legislation. People like Pelosi are on board. The progressives have real sway via AOC and Tlaib and Omar and the rest. We get it done. Biden's like, I'm still going to veto it. This tells you all you need to know about Joe Biden. He is quietly one of the most conservative people in this contest. We haven't really talked about that all that much in this process. We know Bernie Sanders was the most left-leaning. We knew that Elizabeth Warren was not nearly as progressive as Bernie, but kind of well to the left of the rest of the field. And then there was a giant neoliberal blob. Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Booker, Harris, Biden, Beto O'Rourke even, they were all part of the neoliberal blob. But Biden might be the most conservative of all of them in some ways, because it seems like here, he's not even pretending to want, in his dream scenario, Medicare for all. The whole narrative, even going all the way back to the Obama years, when people were like, why didn't Obama fight for a real single-payer system? Why didn't Obama do something great? Why didn't he go all out to achieve something that would transform America forever, instead of the half-assed Obamacare model, which was easy to tear down and still left tens of millions of people without insurance, and many, many more without adequate insurance, forcing low-income people to buy insurance they can't afford that doesn't actually do the job. And one of the arguments was they didn't have the votes. The moderate senators, Joe Lieberman, they'll blame whoever they want. They say we only had 2 years. If we had more votes and we had more time with a Democratic majority in the House and Senate, we would have gotten something closer to Medicare for all done. But what we see from Joe Biden, at least, and Joe Biden was Barack Obama's vice president, and vice presidents like Joe Biden have influence. They may not make the ultimate decision, but they do play an influential role. He opposed Medicare for all, even if it landed.
This is really important. So I got to cover a story. I got to find it. It was about how Barack Obama and all the Democrats could have gotten the votes and intentionally voted against and used a ton of excuses and had no intention of passing a single payer healthcare system like he was talking about. Why didn't you fight for it? They said they didn't have the votes. That's a lie. He may believe that. I'm not bashing him, but this information needs to get out there. It's important. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find the article, but we're going to finish watching what's his name? Sorry. Christo Avalius, I believe. We're going to finish watching his video. Biden would veto Medicare for all. Listen to what he has to say and then talk about it, and try to show another article or two from the original article about the Dem exit and everything. So let's finish listening to this, and then we'll get into some more. It's very important.
Joe Biden have influence. They may not make the ultimate decision, but they do play an influential role.
Sorry about the little delay if you're listening, but just real quick, here we go. We're going to start where you started the first time, so the mouth lines up. And I'm going to get if I get some more support, some more likes, subscribers, and some people on Patreon become patrons, I can use pay for editing software and cut out some of the little mistakes and stuff and clean up these videos for you guys.
Joe Biden have influence. They may not make the ultimate decision, but they do play an influential role. He opposed Medicare for all. Even if it landed on Obama's desk, Joe Biden might have been telling Barack Obama, hey, Barry, you might want to veto this legislation because the insurance lobby's not going to be happy, because the rich and wealthy and well-connected are not going to be happy. And despite the fact that you won off the votes of marginalized and young working-class people, we don't represent those folks. Remember who you represent. Remember, you represent the 1%, the 0.1%. That's who Joe Biden wants to represent when he becomes president, if he becomes president. That's what Joe Biden is saying in this moment. I will veto that legislation. And he tries to frame it in this BS Like, I don't want to delay the access of healthcare, and if Medicare for all takes longer than my option, I'll veto it because it'll leave people without access. But again, it should be said that Joe Biden's public option model, which doesn't offer choice and doesn't offer freedom to millions of Americans, would leave at least 10 million Americans, that's probably an underestimation, at least 10 million Americans without insurance. And who knows how many will have inadequate insurance or precarious insurance. 10 million people. There are countries that have less than 10 million people. That's entire states in the United States worth of people will not have health care. And so Biden is saying, I would rather veto legislation that guarantees as a universal human right healthcare for everyone in lieu of a policy of mine that maybe at the best case will leave 10 million people, which you know are going to be disproportionately poor, disproportionately black, disproportionately Indian American, disproportionately racialized in broader terms. Joe Biden, the supposed candidate that understands the racialized people and understands regular folks, would sell them out just so that he could prevent Medicare for all from happening. Clear as day, guys. This is the clip you need to show people because it takes the mask off the entire Joe Biden campaign. Throughout every part of this campaign, even Biden's wife, the narrative was always that Joe Biden may not have quite as progressive a viewpoint as your chosen candidate, may not be quite as strong on a particular issue, but Joe is here to defeat Donald Trump. And the implication was always that Joe Biden's going to achieve a pragmatic victory. Not that Joe Biden doesn't support policies that broad swaths of the Democratic base support, but that he needs to achieve pragmatism first. So in a hypothetical situation, Biden should feel more than comfortable saying that he would eagerly pass Medicare for all, and yet he isn't. It should be remembered, guys, that while Joe Biden has been largely hiding from the media, last night was a bit of an exception, Bernie Sanders was on Fox News. I made a video about this, where he basically got a Fox News room to boo Fox News hosts and cheer him on when it came to Medicare for all. The policy is a winner. The policy can appeal to Democrats, independents, and working class Republicans. The policy represents the will and interests of the broad American working and middle class. And that's why Joe Biden opposes it. Joe Biden will not be a pragmatist, anti-Trump president. Joe Biden will be a blue Republican president, and he will punish anyone who had the gall to support him as a Democrat. He's going to make Bloomberg head of the World Bank. He's going to put the bankers in charge of the economy, even though the bankers crashed it in '08 and they're crashing it now. That's Joe Biden for you. Even in the best case scenario, even when we can get it down in the House and Senate, he's going to block it anyway because he doesn't give a damn about you.
No, Joe Biden does not. He's right. Joe Biden does not give a damn about you. So Christo Valius is absolutely right. Let's read a quick little piece of this, and I'm going to do a video with the whole thing, but we're going to get a basic idea. This is from Progressive Lineup 2020. Dear Bernie Sanders, your campaign should immediately file a federal lawsuit seeking court intervention, investigation, and oversight of the 2020 Democratic primary. Where's the date? There was no date, unfortunately. Admin. Dear Bernie Sanders, are you aware of the fact sufficient evidence exists to substantiate a valid claim of election fraud occurring against your campaign, specifically drastically reducing your campaign's final election results in those states where the unadjusted exit polling data was at very high unacceptable levels of variance with the actual final election count? In this 2020 Democratic primary, massive election fraud has already occurred in nearly each state thus far and will most likely continue throughout the remainder of the primary. How do we know this? Because of exit polling discrepancies. That's how. A federal lawsuit should be filed immediately in each state where the final election results are at great variance with the exit polling data. But what about right now, before the next set of states? Bernie should seek court-ordered paper ballots for each of the remaining states if the court finds evidence election fraud may have occurred in the previous states. That's how you secure elections. Paper ballots. It's one of the very important ways that you do it. You back up every vote with a paper ballot, so you can prove that those votes are counted. and have people at every polling place make sure that there's no foul play, and they should be independent observers. There's no need to rush this primary, but damn good reason to seek an election free of criminals manipulating and cheating the American voter out of their vote. We need paper ballots now and court-ordered independent election monitors, I didn't read this yet, to observe, record, and deter election interference and fraud. The evidence shows large, unacceptable levels of election negligence. The evidence shows large, unacceptable levels of election negligence / fraud in voting machine operation or vote flipping, chain of custody issues regarding thumb drives, and other devices / methods used to transmit machine tabulations and large exit polling data variance from the final election results, drastically reducing Bernie Sanders' final election results in those states where such great variance took place. Such great variance is not coincidence, but evidence of election fraud. I believe a voter has a constitutional right to free and fair elections. I believe sufficient evidence exists to substantiate a legitimate cause of action in a U.S. District Court lawsuit seeking justice in this primary, which means seeking our constitutional right to a free and fair election in the 2000 Democratic primary. The Bernie Sanders campaign, or We the People, should file a federal lawsuit in each defective state to seek justice and fair results in the 2020 Democratic primary election. What would justice look like? A U.S. District Court judge could institute court oversight of a court investigation of election fraud claims and make findings of fact subsequent to the court appointing independent investigators to inspect all election materials, devices, documents, ballots, tabulations, software, etc., and reach some final conclusions, which could result in the court adjusting the final election results or ordering a new election to be held again. The court could direct a federal agency to interview all witnesses and election officials and workers involved in the processing of votes in those states, including Democratic Party officials, state and national. Here's some of the evidence substantiating such a claim in a federal lawsuit. Now, we're going to do a video on just this article, so I'm not going to get into it, but this is an important point. So I'm going to finish this up. Exit polling discrepancies. The evidence indicates the final election results do not match the exit polling data. A variance of 1 to 3% in the exit polling data has been deemed normal and acceptable for decades, worldwide and nationally. In this 2020 Democratic primary, the exit polling variance is upwards of 3%, 8%, and much higher depending upon which state. Like, I believe it was either Iowa or New Hampshire to benefit Pete Buttigieg, and it went down to what Bernie Sanders should have gotten. And he still won. The evidence exists proving election fraud occurred in Super Tuesday's elections and the first 4 states. This is a really important website. I've been talking about it and been meaning to pull it up, so I'm really glad I did this. See this right here? Look, HT, you just type in TDMS, TD as in dog, M as in Mike, S as in Sam, research, tdmsresearch.com. And they have all the primaries for 2020. Here's just an example of South Carolina 2020 Democratic primary. South Carolina 2020 Democratic Party presidential primary. Exit poll versus reported vote count. Here's the candidates where the exit poll proportion was 44.7%. What? Reported total count proportion was 48.4% for Biden. The difference is 3.7%, and the gain or loss from exit poll, 8.3%. Wow. And then you have Klobuchar, who got 2.6% higher in the exit poll, and she got 22.7% positive gain from the exit polls. They're stolen votes, people. Sanders lost negative 6.6% votes, meaning he should have got probably like around, not lost any votes, but that's a high number, 6.6%, which the CIA overthrows governments over. And 2%, they say, is too high. 2% or higher is too much for the CIA. Gabbard loses 31.3%. 31.3%. Tulsi Gabbard. No, Tulsi Gabbard lost from the exit polls, saying she got 2.6%, the reported total count proportion 3.2%, difference total vote proportion 0.6%. Just all of this is so awful. Negative 7.7% for Tom Steyer. Negative 3.8% for Buttigieg. They lost. This is just election fraud. We need to do something.